I bet you've heard a lot of things about all the changes that have happened in real estate ever since the NAR settlement, and so many people are confused. So I'm going to be putting out a series of videos over the next week that will help explain it for both the sellers and the buyers and hopefully clear all of this up. Let's look at how we actually got to this NAR settlement. You see, there are several states across the country that did not have the proper paperwork in place to designate a buyer's agent, they didn't even have that, and a listing seller's agent. And within that paperwork, they didn't even have the proper wording to actually outline how the compensation worked. Here in North Carolina, we always had it outlined properly in our paperwork. We had buyer agency, seller's agency, listing agency, and we also had dual agency and designated dual agency. That's a whole nother video. But other than that, what we have done here in North Carolina is highlight those areas for you on our paperwork, have you initial by it because it was pretty much always there. We just made it a little clearer to make sure you really understand it. And there you have it. Other states, they were in trouble. And now all of us have to highlight it for you on our paperwork. Okay, sellers, so what does the NAR settlement mean for you here in North Carolina? Well, our paperwork always had the listing seller side of the commission or the compensation broken out away from separate what you would agree to pay a buyer's agent. We've always had it that way, and we always needed to have a buyer agency agreement on the other side. We had some other designations. That's a whole nother video. But basically, our paperwork always broke out. Here is my compensation for being your listing agent. Should you choose to compensate the buyer's agent, this is what it would be. Now, there are always going to be additional conversations as to, is it beneficial to compensate the buyer's side? What would it mean if I didn't? What does it look like if I agreed to a certain amount versus another amount? Again, a whole nother video, but our paperwork always broke it out, listing side, and if you agree, buyer's side. Okay, one more video about how the NAR settlement is affecting sellers here in North Carolina. So many are asking, should I compensate the buyer's side? What happens if I don't? If I do, how much should I do it? Those are all conversations that have to happen according to market conditions. What is going to happen if you don't? Can that buyer actually afford to pay both the full listing price and their agent's commission if you're not going to? And a lot of times these buyers are going to come in and potentially adjust the numbers based on what it is that you will be doing as a seller. It's not always going to happen. Again, market conditions, location, but these are conversations that you really need to have with your agent because you really need to analyze everything that's happening in the area before making a decision as to whether or not you as the seller will compensate the buyer side and how much that will be. Okay, so what does the NAR settlement mean for you as a buyer here in North Carolina? Well, as I mentioned in my previous video, our paperwork always clearly stated that our compensation would be a certain amount. That was our professional fee. We don't work for free. And that we would first seek to get that compensation from the seller's side. But the statement always said, if the seller does not agree to pay or the full amount, that the buyer agrees to make up the difference or pay the full amount. Literally, our paperwork always said it. So now it's simply highlighted, bolded, and you have to initial it. And that's how it has always worked here in North Carolina with our buyer agency agreements. One quick note on how the NAR settlement is affecting day-to-day interactions for all of us realtors. Number one, all buyers must have a signed buyer agency agreement before going to see any home. In the past, you could have signed that buyer agency agreement before putting in an offer, but now it must be in place before going to see any home. Number two, the MLS no longer has compensation or anything listed in any of the listings. So any buyer agent must call the listing agent and ask them if the seller is going to be offering compensation, and if so, how much, and you must relay that back to your buyer before going to see the house so that they can understand how that might affect their offer. So don't forget, number one, you must have that buyer agency agreement signed and in place before going to see any home. Number two, the buyer agent has to call and find out if compensation is being offered and tell that to the buyer before going out to see the house.